When will the UK finally legalize weed? It's a difficult question to answer, and maybe it's not even the right question we should be asking. Perhaps we should ask ourselves, when is the government going to end the decades-long war on drugs? The war on drugs began in the early 1970s. It was advertised by then President Richard Nixon as the only way to combat the United States' growing drug epidemic. And with full weight of the US federal government behind Nixon, Nixon's war on drugs quickly spread to all corners of the globe. From paying the Mexican government to spray poison on weed headed to the US to leveraging its power over Europe, soon enough countries fell in line, even if state leaders had problems with this new global consensus surrounding drugs. Not only is the war on drugs policy problematic, but it's also racist. In the United States specifically, there has shown to be a clear correlation between arrests for small amounts of drug use and possession and the overrepresentation of black and brown people in prison. Statistically speaking, people of color on average consume the same amount of drugs as their white counterparts, but looking at the arrest numbers, you wouldn't know that. The same is true for the European Union and undoubtedly true for the United Kingdom, which in a nutshell is a microcosm of US policy abroad. However, governments aren't the only ones to blame. While the war on drugs was being implemented, confidence in media was reaching a climax, and soon faith in media would begin to dissipate after the Walter Cronkites of cable television began to phase out of fashion. But in the early rise of 24/7 news cycles, people still believed news anchors to be truthful, honest reporters, and because of that, the floodgates of misinformation were open. There became a desire to dramatize and in some cases lie about the actual public health risks when it comes to the world of drugs. The media loves to make illicit drugs like ecstasy appear as if the devil made him himself. For example, multiple studies have shown that nearly every reported ecstasy death receives extensive media coverage compared to alcohol-related deaths, which is odd because when ecstasy is used responsibly, it is safer to use than alcohol. And with weed, you cannot overdose on it. There has been no credible cases of someone dying exclusively because they used marijuana. It is possible to harm yourself by consuming a obtuse amount of weed, but in that extreme case, that will just leave you with a bit of a sore liver and a temporary foggy head. Symptoms you would get after a night of drinking too much. Which is why drugs, especially marijuana, should be legalized, regulated, and taxed just like alcohol is. Alcohol is more dangerous than weed. It kills 100% more people than marijuana does, and it is responsible for an overwhelming amount of DUI arrests, and yet it is viewed by the British government as an appropriate drug which gets to participate in society as a socially acceptable drug of choice. The war on drugs has unfairly locked up black and brown people at discriminatory rates and has forced drug users to do business with criminal organizations. If UK really wants to win its war on drugs and in turn finally legalize weed, the country needs to put down their handcuffs and raise a helping hand by legalizing, regulating, and taxing all drugs while also expanding funding for drug rehabilitation and social services. Because the only effective way to win the war on drugs is to stop treating drug users and drug addicts as criminals.